Hello friends, in the series which we are doing in issues in world history, the 20th century, today we will talk about the rise of fascism and Nazism. In the earlier three lectures on fascism and Nazism, we talked about the rise of Mussolini, we talked the rise of the Nazi party, and we also in a way started with the rise of Hitler as well. And we talked about that how the situation after the First World War favored such kind of movements like Nazism and Fascism, because the masses in both these countries, they felt that they had been disrespected during the First World War and thereafter. Italy being on the side of the victors as well, we find that Italy was not satisfied with the kind of treatment which was meted out to them. Germany, on the other hand, that the war guilt clause was being forced on them. The kind of territorial possessions which they had, they were being taken away from them. Their army, navy, etc., they were also being restricted, and air force was banned in that sense. And how the troops, they were also being in a way restricted, and this kind of a situation led to the rise of various factions, whether they were the socialist, Catholics, etc. And we also find that how the communists also, they were there at that point of time. And we see when these kinds of factions, they were there, and how they were trying to rule as well. And after the running away of the emperor in Germany, we find that different governments, they came before the arrival of Hitler at the scene. And how Nazi party, it was in a way effective in terms of deriding all these successive governments, in terms of not taking care of Germany in that sense. And we also see that the economic situation prior to the arrival of Hitler, where we find that in 1929 especially, the world economic crisis was one of the reasons where we find that the economic situation deteriorated across the world. And this was one of the factors. We find that Hitler was able to secure his authority from 1933 onwards, though he was not in majority, but over a period of time he was able to secure the power for himself, though he also tried earlier to secure the power, but he was not successful. And we see that in 1923 he tried a coup, but that coup failed and he was arrested and jailed as well, and his party was proscribed and dissolved from 1923 onwards. And in this imprisonment only he wrote Mein Kampf, which was published in 1925-26. And when we see the rise of Hitler, we find that he was an Austrian and who had joined the German army, and he had fought in the trenches on the Western Front as an ordinary soldier, and thereafter he joined a group organized by Anton Drexler, which started the Nazi movement. So we find that the activities of Hitler, who was an Austrian, and he took a lot of pride being that way, and we also find that he in a way reorganized the party in that manner, where we find that the Nazi party was able to secure the German state for itself. And we find that how Hitler was an influential member, and he told the German people that Germany was not defeated in the war, but was let down. So the issue of German pride was being talked about by him, and he was not talking about the defeat of Germany, but the way Germans, they were being treated, how they were being let down. And this group in a way infused some kind of a spirit, new spirit among the Germans, and this movement of the Nazis became revolutionary and militant during this time. And Hitler, in terms of his ideas, was very rigid, and he was some kind of a dictator. and he assumed all the powers for himself, and he was the one who was taking all the decisions. And he said that what we have to fight for is the security for our race and our nation, nourishment of its children and the purity of its blood, freedom and independence for the fatherland. So these were the kind of ideas which Hitler propagated, where he was trying to talk about the issue of security for everyone among the Germans, and how the race and the nation, they were to be safeguarded, and how the children of Germany, they were to be nourished by the state. And the idea of the purity of blood was also an important component of the Nazi philosophy and Nazi ideas, where we find that they were talking about the purity of blood and claiming themselves to be the Aryans and how of the Aryan race, and rest others they were being rejected by them, they were not being seen at par with them, and German race was considered to be the most superior among all the humans, and the other ones, they were not even considered to be the human ones as well. And they were also talking about that how independence and freedom was an important component of their ideas. And he in a way was trying to in a way deal with the tender sentiments of the Germans, and he told them in the German Reich as well that as a state should include all the Germans. So this idea of Greater Germany or Pan-Germanism was also being talked about, and how Germans, they had to also in a way exceed or accept these kinds of ideas, where the glory of the Germans was being talked about, and how all the Germans, those who are not there in Germany but in other places as well, they were part of their creed, and how they were to be brought under the German state. And he also talked about the aim of the National Socialists or the Nazi Party was to secure for the German people an extension of the space in which our people must live. So he was talking about the idea of Lebensraum or the living space, where he communicated that how more and more areas which were there in other regions of the world, they were to be captured by Germany, and how the German people, they were to be settled there, how the raw materials of these regions, they were to be utilized by the German state. So this idea of the living space or the Lebensraum was also an important component of what Hitler was talking about. And we also find that how he had a major hatred for France, which he considered an eternal and mortal enemy of the German nation. So he disliked France in that sense, and he felt that how French people, they were not friends of Germany. And he in a way talked about that whatever kind of injustice which had been meted out to Germany after the First World War because of the imposition of the Treaty of Versailles, and how this treaty was to be rejected and denounced, and how it was to be in a way revised as well. So he was talking from that particular framework, and he wanted to in a way mobilize the masses from that perspective. And the party which is established, the Nazi Party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and this party assumed an aggressive role from 1926 onwards, and its following began to rise readily over a period of time after that. So we find that the kind of ideas which were being promoted and propagated by Hitler, they were liked by the masses, and his party included both the national as well as the socialist world, so as well as the workers' party. So we find that the socialist, workers and nationalists, all of them, they had to be within their fold if we go by the title of the party, as well as we find that he secured the support of the capitalist elements, where we find that the capitalists, they also feared that in Germany the communists may not assume the power. So they were scared of the communists in terms of securing power in Germany, and that is how they felt that some kind of support to Hitler should be given, so that the communists, they should not come to power in Germany. So that was the kind of a situation in which Hitler was operating, and we find that how the unemployed workers and the poverty stricken middle class Germans, they were affected by the kind of orations of the party leaders, and how they were won over by the party and its promise of future greatness for Germany. So they were able to create this kind of a sentiment among the masses, that how they will be able to achieve some kind of a glory which was there in the past, which had been lost recently, how they will be able to have a better standard of living for themselves, because apart from the glory, some kind of a prosperity for Germany will also be brought about by the Nazi party. And we find that over a period of time they were able to increase their seats in the elections as well. And in the national elections of 1930, we find that the National Socialists, they won 107 seats in Reichstag, which had a total strength of 576 seats. So we find that the numbers, they also increased over a period of time, and Hitler was very happy, and he said that heads will roll in this struggle, and he contested the presidency in 1932 against the grand old man Hindenburg and secured 37% of the German votes. So we find that over a period of time the popularity of Hitler also increased, and the number of seats of the Nazi party they also increased. But he also lost the elections, and it convinced him that he was the man of the future of Germany. So despite losing the election, he had this kind of a conviction in him that he will be the one who will be able to guide Germany in future. And we find that in the Reichstag elections of 1932, it gave him 230 seats out of a total of 608, and it emerged as the single largest party. And the government ordered the re-elections, in which National Socialists won 96 seats in a house of 584. So we find that at no point of time Nazi party was able to secure majority for itself, and over a period of time we find that their votes and strength in the next election, though it got reduced, but despite that it was the single largest party. And how Hitler was now invited by the president to become the chancellor, and when Hitler demanded the powers to rule the country without the help of the parliament, it was being denied to him. So we find that Nazi party becoming the single largest party, and how Hitler wanted to rule Germany without the help of the parliament, but it was not being given, this kind of a position was not being given to him. And he was able to form some kind of a coalition government in January 1933, and thereafter he ordered new elections to the Reichstag. And we find that the Reichstag building was put on fire on the eve of elections by some miscreants, and how Hitler was able to blame it on the communists and pressurize the president to sign a declaration of emergency. And the constitution, along with fundamental and other relevant rights, was suspended, and then he let loose his storm troops on the political opponents. And we find that the kind of measures which were being undertaken by Hitler at this point of time, where we find that the Communist Party was declared illegal and it was banned along with many other political parties, and Hitler was able to in a way organize some kind of a reign of terror. And when President Hindenburg died in 1934, Hitler combined the office of the president with that of the chancellor, and himself became the Führer, or the leader of Germany. So we find that how Hitler was able to in a way secure power for himself in 1934, where he assumes both the offices and he becomes the Führer, or the leader of Germany. And thereafter we find that his authority in a way increased over a period of time, and many of the extra constitutional bodies or units which were being created by Hitler also helped him in this cause, where he was able to dominate that dominate the German masses, in that sense, where masses they were being made to believe that how they are going to be some kind of a the most important state and the most powerful state in the world, where they will not be only be supreme in Europe, but they will be the most supreme nation across the world. And when we talk about the kind of situation which was there in Germany and how various factors they played an important role in terms of the rise of Nazism, we find, as we have talked earlier as well, that how the First World War and the Versailles Treaty left Germany disillusioned, and how Germany was crushed spiritually and materially, and how this kind of a situation was utilized by Hitler to assuage the feelings of the masses, that how the Nazi party will in a way function in such a manner that the lost German pride and the glory will be brought back. And we also see, apart from this, the hostile attitude of France and the quarrels over the Ruhr and the Rhineland occupation, the Saar and the reparation it was made to pay. So these were other reasons where we find that in the Treaty of Versailles such kind of demands they were being made on Germany. Apart from the war guilt clause, we find that from the economic point of view, a lot of money was being taken from Germany through the reparations which it had to pay, apart from many of the areas of Germany which were being taken away from Germany, and they were being given to some other states. So that was one another important reason because of which the situation in Germany was not that they liked this kind of a treatment, and this kind of sentiment was being utilized by Hitler to propagate his ideas. We also see that how some kind of a ceaseless wrangling over the security and disarmament was there, and all these fed the indignation and the anger of many of the Germans. And there we also see that the Republic's acceptance of the unfair disabilities, its policy of reconciliation, and its ability to assert itself more strongly in international affairs rankled in the hearts of many Germans. So we find that how these factors they were also responsible, where we find that how the situation in Germany came to such a kind of a situation where Nazis they were able to propagate their ideas. And as also we talked earlier, that how the situation prior to the world economic crisis which happened in 1929, and there was some kind of a temporary economic revival during this particular period from 24 to 29 as well, but these factors they were in the background. And but we find that how the 1929 crisis or the world economic crisis brought Germans and other nations of Europe to a kind of a situation where we find that the economy also came into trouble, and the poverty in these regions, then inflation was another important factor during this time, as well as the unemployment figures they also rose. So because of all these kinds of factors, we find that the economic situation in many of these regions it declined, and how in Germany especially, we find the Nazis through their propaganda methods they tried to capitalize on these kinds of situations, and through the oratory of Hitler and the kind of propaganda machinery which had its which was there at their disposal, how the posters, banners, songs, uniforms, ceremonies, rituals, discipline, historic traditions, theories of racial superiority of Germans, anti-Semitism, the dynamic personality of Hitler, they were the major points of attractions for the millions of Germans. So we find that through a systematic kind of a discipline which was being practiced by the Nazi party, where through its own propaganda, and we also see the ideas of anti-Semitism which were there, where they blamed the Jews for whatever ills of Germany and whatever the kind of a situation in which the Germans were there. Jews and other people, those who were not liked by the Germans, they were being blamed for such kind of a situation of Germany. And we find that different kinds of act at different points of time, they came in Germany in 1930s, where we find that the rights of the Jews, they were being taken away by the German state, and they were being traumatized, they were being victimized to such an extent that many of the Jews, they fled from these regions to other parts of the world. So this kind of an attitude and approach which was reflected in Germany could also be seen in some of the films like Schindler's List, which talks about that how many of the Jews, they were being in a way helped by a person to migrate or even to remain within Germany with their help, and how they could in a way saved from persecution. Or we also see that so many accounts of these Germans, they are of these Jews, they are being recorded, and they are being kept in different museums across the world. And so this kind of a policy of anti-Semitism or the persecution of the Jews was an important component of the Nazi philosophy, and it was also being practiced in the various concentration camps which were set up in different parts of Germany. And how the people, they got mobilized by these kinds of ideas, and how they believed that they needed some man who was a strong person to restore the peace, prestige and the prosperity of the Germans, which was the part of their traditions earlier. And we find that such kind of policies of anti-Semitism, such kind of an idea of totalitarianism which was a part of the Nazi state could be seen in the framework of the policies which were followed by the Nazi party. And when we talk about the way they in a way ruled the German state, we find that their impact was direct and severe on the people of Germany, and it was also indirect at some points of time, and how it was paralyzing on Europe and the rest of the world. And when we talk about the Nazis, how they adopted the unscrupulous, ruthless and the terrorist methods, all in the garb of serving the nation and racial superiority of the German race. So they were in a way criticized for such kind of policies which they followed in that sense, and how the kind of impact which they created on the masses, not only in Germany but also across the world. And when you see how the Nazi party did not have any kind of regard for life and property in the framework of the assassinations in which they indulged, and it was also being criticized for having no political morals, and how they adopted different kinds of incendiary methods for the growth of their own party. And so we find that Nazi party was being criticized for these kinds of tactics, and how they were trying to terrorize the masses, how they were trying to in a way propagate their own ideas on the masses through the various methods. And we also see that how people, they joined the party, how people, they did not have that kind of an they did not have much option in that sense. It was also being talked by some of the scholars that they had this kind of a belief that how all this kind of a prosperity which was being promised by the Nazi party would be for everyone. And so we find that the propaganda ministry of the Nazis, they were trying to inculcate, or they were trying to in a way communicate these kinds of ideas, that how prosperity would come to the German state through the policies which are being followed by the Nazis, and the kind of 25-point program which was initiated by Hitler, where he talked about forming a greater Germany by the union of all Germans in a single state, also fascinated the German masses. And we see that how Germany was able to establish itself as a totalitarian state, and how all sorts of opposition which was there against Hitler was crushed by him, and how he was able to assume some kind of a supreme power both within and outside his party. And so this can be compared with the kind of a situation which was there in Italy, where you had Mussolini, and we also have seen that this kind of a situation was also there in Soviet state of Russia, where we see that how the revolutionaries, though the communists, they were there, but they were also using the similar kind of tactics to establish their position. So we will talk further about these kinds of ideas which are related to the Nazi party in our next lecture, and the rise of Hitler in the next lecture. Thank you very much.